It started with a whisper in a hallway. A 6-year-old boy and a gun. On January 6, 2023, a cold, ordinary Friday morning in Newport News, Virginia, the sound of learning echoed through Richneck Elementary School. Crayons. Reading time. The hum of children's voices. And then, chaos. A gunshot. One sound that shattered a classroom. Inside room 11, first-grade teacher Abby Zwerner fell backward from her chair, clutching her chest and her hand, her students screaming in terror. Her heart was racing, blood spreading fast. In that instant, she thought one thing. I thought I was dying. I thought I had died. She wasn't wrong to think so. The bullet had pierced through her left hand before striking her upper chest. It was fired by her own student, a 6-year-old boy. The story stunned America. It wasn't just a shooting. It was a failure. And it started long before the gun went off. Earlier that morning, teachers had raised concerns. Multiple staff members reportedly warned school administrators that the child might have a gun, that he was showing it off, that he was threatening other students. But according to the lawsuit that would follow, those warnings were ignored. At the center of that decision stood one woman, Ebony Parker, the assistant principal of Richneck Elementary. She was the one accused of doing nothing, of turning away the warnings, of telling staff the child's backpack had been checked when it hadn't. Fast forward more than a year later. A courtroom packed with reporters, lawyers, and quiet rage. A civil trial before the criminal one. And on the stand sat the woman who almost died that day, Abby Zwerner. Zwerner was only 25 when she took the teaching job at Richneck. Bright, kind, known for her patience with kids who struggled. That Friday, she came to school early, ready for a day of reading lessons and winter crafts. The student, unnamed because of his age, had a history of behavioral problems. Throwing furniture, swearing, violent outbursts. And that morning, something was different. His eyes, his temper, his silence. By mid-morning, a staff member reported seeing the boy with a gun. Another said he told a classmate he planned to shoot someone. Warnings went up the chain, all the way to Assistant Principal Parker. But according to court testimony, Parker dismissed the concerns. She reportedly said the boy's backpack had been checked, that everything was fine. Teachers disagreed. One even pleaded for a search to be done again. It never happened. Minutes later, Abby Zwerner sat down at a reading table. Her students gathered around, small voices reading aloud. Then the boy walked in. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a 9mm handgun, a weapon he'd taken from his mother's purse. Loaded, ready. He raised the gun and fired. The chaos that followed was indescribable. Children screamed. Desks overturned. One teacher ran in, ushering students out of the room. Abby somehow managed to get her kids to safety, bleeding, shaking, still standing. She guided them down the hallway, out of harm's way. Only then did she collapse. In the months that followed, the small city of Newport News became the center of a national conversation. How did a 6-year-old get a gun into a classroom? How did every warning fail? And who was to blame? Zwerner sued. Not the boy. Not his parents. But the school system, and specifically Ebony Parker, the assistant principal who she said ignored it all. In court filings, Zwerner's lawyers described that day as the result of a cascade of negligence. They argued Parker had multiple chances to act, but didn't. And they painted a picture of a system that prioritized routine over safety. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Jurors leaned forward. Cameras waited outside. Reporters filled the back row. For Abby, this wasn't about money. It was about accountability. Safety has to be the first concern at schools, her lawyer Diane Toscano told reporters outside the courthouse. What happened that day was wrong, and it's not going to be tolerated. The defense told a different story. Ebony Parker's lawyers insisted she wasn't negligent. They said no one, Not a teacher, not an administrator, could have predicted what happened. They called it unprecedented, unthinkable, unforeseeable. Defense attorney Sandra Douglas looked the jury in the eye and said, "It was a tragedy. But please, don't compound that tragedy by blaming Dr. Parker for it." But Abby's lawyers didn't back down. They replayed the timeline, minute by minute, warning by warning. They showed emails, statements from staff, testimony that proved, at least in their eyes, Parker had every reason to act. One of Abby's attorneys, Kevin Binnieson, said it bluntly, "A gun changes everything. You stop. You investigate. You get to the bottom of it." He told the jury that Parker's job was safety, and that she failed the one moment it mattered most. In the courtroom, Abby sat quietly. Her hand is still damaged. Her nerves frayed. Her voice, soft but steady, told the jury what it felt like to look death in the face. "I thought I was dying. I thought I had died," she said, her words barely above a whisper. She described how the pain still lingered, how opening a bottle of water was now a daily challenge, how she avoided people, even family, how she felt isolated. Her trauma wasn't just physical, it was emotional, invisible, endless. The jury listened. 6 long days. Every testimony, every cross-examination, every picture of that classroom. Then came closing arguments. Binnieson stood tall, pacing in front of the jury box. His voice rose with every sentence. "Dr. Parker's job is safety. You stop. You investigate. You don't ignore warnings when a gun might be on campus." The defense pushed back. They said Abby never personally went to Parker with her own concerns. That she, too, might have missed warning signs. That safety is a shared responsibility, not one woman's burden. But the jury had heard enough. After 5.5 hours of deliberation, the verdict was read. Guilty of negligence. Ebony Parker would be held liable. $10 million. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Reporters scrambled to tweet. Abby lowered her head, tears rolling silently down her face. It wasn't about the money, it was validation. A declaration that someone had failed her. Outside, her lawyer Toscano told the crowd, "This verdict says that what happened at Richneck Elementary School was wrong, and it will not be tolerated." Beside her, Binnieson added, "Accountability has to come from anyone who contributed to what happened." The jury decided what's right. But the verdict wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because the civil case, the one that just ended, was only the first act. The next would be criminals. And this time, the stakes were higher. Ebony Parker was already facing 8 counts of felony child neglect. Her criminal trial was set for the following month. And what had just played out in civil court, all that testimony, all that evidence, would likely resurface again. For prosecutors, the civil trial was like a preview, a window into what was coming. Legal experts said it was rare. Usually, criminal trials come first, civil ones after. But here, the order was reversed, and it could change everything. Law professor Darrell K. Brown from the University of Virginia told reporters, "It's really unusual, but it gives the defense a lot of information about what's coming in the criminal trial." In other words, the script was already written. The defense now knew exactly what the prosecution would say, what evidence would land, and what the jury already believed. But outside the courthouse, anger was building. Parents, teachers, community members. People wanted more than accountability. They wanted answers. How did a 6-year-old boy carry a loaded gun into a classroom? How did 4 separate warnings vanish into thin air? How did an entire school system fail to protect its own teacher? The questions didn't stop. Neither did the outrage. Social media exploded. Clips of the verdict went viral. Comment sections filled with disbelief. How could this even happen? 6 years old. 6. Someone needs to go to jail for this. The case became a flashpoint in the debate over school safety and the epidemic of children accessing firearms. Reporters dug deeper. Documents revealed the boy had a history of violence, even toward teachers. At one point, he had tried to choke another educator. And yet, he was still in a classroom setting. No expulsion. No serious intervention. Just warnings. And those warnings went nowhere. The city's school board scrambled to manage the fallout. Resignations followed. Policies changed. But for Abby Zwerner, none of it erased the memory. The sound of that gunshot. The smell of the classroom. The look on her students' faces. Even now, she says she still hears it sometimes, that echo. The moment her life changed forever. Ebony Parker, once a respected educator, was now branded negligent. Her face was on every local headline. She stayed mostly silent, her lawyers speaking for her. But inside the community, the lines were drawn. Some said she was a scapegoat. Others said she was the reason Abby nearly died. The courtroom victory split the town in two. Meanwhile, Parker's criminal trial loomed, and this time, the consequences weren't financial. They were personal. 8 felony charges, each one carrying potential prison time. And the public wanted blood. As the verdict spread, protesters began to gather outside the courthouse. Signs, chants, anger boiling under winter skies. Protect our teachers. Justice for Abby. Hold her accountable. Inside, lawyers prepared their next move. Parker's team filed post-trial motions. They hinted at an appeal. They questioned the jury's reasoning. But nothing could stop what was coming next. Because the next trial wouldn't just be about negligence. It would be about criminal responsibility. And for the first time in modern history, an assistant principal would stand accused of felony child neglect tied to a school shooting. The legal precedent, monumental. The emotional toll, unbearable. And the public's patience, running out. Abby stayed mostly out of the spotlight after the verdict. She avoided interviews. Her lawyers spoke on her behalf. But in private, friends say she still struggled. Still couldn't hold a pencil comfortably. Still woke up in the middle of the night, replaying the scene. The civil verdict gave her justice, but not peace. And as the criminal case neared, one thing became clear. This story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because when the court doors opened again, and Ebony Parker walked back into that courtroom, every secret, every failure, and every ignored warning would come to light. It was calm before another storm. Newport News, small, coastal, ordinary. But in the weeks after the civil verdict, the quiet town had become something else entirely. A battlefield of opinions. A symbol of everything broken in America's schools. Because while the courtroom had delivered its judgment, $10 million, the nation was just starting to pass its own. The civil case was done. But the criminal trial of Ebony Parker loomed ahead like a shadow. 8 felony counts. Child neglect. Failure to act. Each charge, a reminder of what was at stake. But outside the courthouse, something bigger was happening. A movement. Teachers from across Virginia began speaking out. Not just about Richneck Elementary, but about every ignored warning, every underfunded classroom, every "we'll handle it later" moment that led to tragedy. Handmade signs lined the courthouse fence. Protect our teachers. Listen when we speak. Safety over silence. It wasn't just about Abby anymore. It was about all of them. And Abby, she stayed out of sight. Recovering. Healing. As much as anyone could after nearly dying in front of first graders. The scars on her hand were visible. The ones inside, invisible but deeper. She told her lawyers she still couldn't sleep without checking the door lock 3 times. That she flinched when she heard kids yelling. That she missed teaching, but couldn't imagine going back. Her life had become quiet, closed off. But across the nation, her story was everywhere. cable news, podcasts, TikTok. Every platform had its take. Some called her a hero. Others called her a victim of a system that didn't care until it was too late. But everyone asked the same question. How could this have happened? In Richmond, Virginia lawmakers started meetings behind closed doors. Proposals were drafted. New safety rules debated. Metal detectors in every school. Mandatory reporting for all threats. Psychological assessments for repeat behavior problems. For once, people were listening. But change, real change, would come slow. Back in Newport News, the criminal case against Ebony Parker moved forward. Her defense team, exhausted, cornered, filed motion after motion. Delay requests. Procedural objections. Appeal hints. They argued she had become a scapegoat, the person everyone wanted to blame when the real issue was gun access, not school management. Reporters swarmed the courthouse again. Microphones. Cameras. The same faces who had covered the civil trial were back, ready for another spectacle. But this time, the tone was different. Harder. Colder. Public sympathy had shifted. People weren't just asking about Ebony Parker's actions anymore. They were asking about the system that allowed her to fail. Inside the school district's administration building, tension ran high. Meetings turned into arguments. Leaked emails showed a pattern. Missed interventions, ignored red flags, constant pressure to keep the school's image clean. It painted a grim picture. A system that prioritized reputation over safety. Meanwhile, Abby's lawyers released a short statement. This case has always been about accountability, not vengeance. But the truth was, for many, vengeance felt justified. Local news stations aired interviews with teachers from other districts. One said she'd reported a violent student multiple times. Nothing was done. Another admitted she kept a doorstop in her room to block intruders, just in case. The fear was spreading. When the criminal proceedings officially began, the courtroom was packed. Not with journalists this time, but with teachers. Hundreds of them, sitting shoulder to shoulder, silent, watching. You could feel the air thick with exhaustion and quiet fury. Prosecutors argued Parker had a duty, a legal obligation, to protect both her students and staff. They replayed the same timeline from the civil trial. The ignored warnings. The teachers who begged her to act. The moments that could have changed everything. But this time, the weight felt heavier. Because the world was watching. Outside, parents held photos of their children. Some smiled brightly in the frames. Others were gone. Victims of other shootings, other warnings ignored. Different cities. Same story. Across America, school shootings were rising again. 64 in that year alone. 27 on K-12 campuses. The numbers told a horrifying truth. Children were dying, and adults were failing them. And so, to many, the Parker case wasn't about one woman. It was about a line being drawn, a moment when someone, finally, would be held accountable. But not everyone agreed. Some parents defended Parker. She didn't pull the trigger, one said. She's being punished for an impossible job. Others fired back. She had a chance to stop it. She didn't. The debate tore through the community. Church groups, PTA meetings, Facebook threads. Newport News was split down the middle. As the trial unfolded, Abby's presence was felt even when she wasn't there. Her story hung over every question, every exhibit, every silent pause. Prosecutors spoke her name softly, almost reverently. Defense attorneys avoided it whenever they could. Her pain had become evidence. Meanwhile, experts testified about the impossible burden teachers face: large classrooms, behavioral issues, mental health crises, lack of support. And they said something that stuck with everyone watching. Safety isn't one person's job. It's everyone's job. But when everyone assumes someone else will handle it, no one does. That sentence echoed beyond the courtroom. Clipped, reposted, quoted on every news page. A haunting truth for every parent watching at home. Weeks turned into months. The criminal proceedings dragged on. But while lawyers argued over responsibility, the real world kept moving. Abby began physical therapy again. She posted her first photo since the verdict, a quiet picture of her holding a paintbrush, her injured hand trembling but steady. The caption read, "Still healing." It went viral within hours. Teachers nationwide rallied behind her. Hashtag Justice for Abby trended. Celebrities posted her story. Fundraisers popped up for classroom safety initiatives in her name. The case had become more than news. It had become a symbol. But symbols come with weight. And behind that weight, a woman still struggled to find normalcy. Abby's friends said she rarely spoke about the boy, the one who shot her. She never blamed him out loud. But when asked privately, she said something haunting. "He's a child. The adults failed him before he ever failed me." That sentence reframed everything. Because this story wasn't about one villain. It was about an entire system of failure. From the home where the gun was left unlocked, to the school where warnings were ignored, to the district that prioritized policy over people. Months after the criminal trial began, testimony after testimony painted Parker as overwhelmed, understaffed, and unsupported. A principal who made the wrong call, in a system that left her no good choices. It didn't excuse her decisions, but it explained the cracks. Legal experts on TV debated what accountability should mean. Should it be punished? Or prevention? Because no matter the verdict, one fact couldn't be erased. A 6-year-old brought a loaded gun to school. And fired it. That reality haunted everyone. By the time closing arguments arrived, the mood was somber. The defense spoke softly. The prosecution, sharply. And as the judge dismissed the jury to deliberate, no one in the room moved for a long time. The teachers in the back row held hands. Some cried. Others stared blankly at the floor. Outside, cameras rolled. Reporters whispered predictions. But for the people who lived it, this wasn't entertainment. It was trauma replayed in real time. When the verdict finally came, the air in the courtroom felt like it could shatter. No cameras. No noise. Just the sound of the clerk reading words that would echo across America. Ebony Parker's fate was sealed. But more importantly, so was the message. Because the verdict wasn't just about one person's guilt. It was about a nation's responsibility. Every headline carried it. Every district felt it. Every teacher wondered, quietly, if this happened in my classroom, would anyone listen to me? Outside, the protests didn't stop. They grew. Teachers wore red ribbons for Abby. Parents signed petitions. Districts reviewed safety protocols. But for many, it all felt too late. In an emotional statement, Abby finally broke her silence. "I loved teaching. I loved my students. What happened that day wasn't just my story. It's every teacher's worst fear. I hope no one else ever has to live it." Her voice cracked halfway through. Then she walked off stage, tears in her eyes, her hand shaking slightly. The crowd stood in silence. A year later, the classroom where it happened had been remodeled. Fresh paint. New bookshelves. But the space still carried weight. Teachers said you could feel it, an unspoken sadness in the air. Newport News had changed. Policies rewritten. Personnel reshuffled. But what remained was a memory. Legal scholars would later say the Zwerner case changed the way America viewed school liability forever. It redefined accountability. It drew a new line between tragedy and negligence. And it reminded the world that in every institution, there are warning signs, and there are choices. In the end, there were no winners. Just survivors. A teacher who would never be the same. A community still healing. And a system forced to stare into its own reflection. Because in America's classrooms, safety can no longer be assumed. Every unlocked drawer. Every ignored warning. Every "it's probably fine" moment could cost a life. And the story of Abby Zwerner, is the story of what happens when no one listens soon enough.